ready to go.
Okay, so we are resuming the recording afresh. Sorry, there was more content than needed to be on the previous recording, but we haven't really got into course content. But welcome back, welcome back. I will take a moment. Is there one or two folks that want to share? And I can see you all right now because we're not screen sharing. Anyone from your groups want to just kind of give quick feedback on what that quote, how that resonated for you? Anyone want to share with me?
Yes. Well,
Morning, Ultra.
Hi. So in our group, we were talking about this resembling or kind of being interpreted as a child who needs attention and doesn't feel welcome or embraced by his environment, whatever that is, home or the community, and tries to look for ways to get that attention, not literally burning it down, but maybe jumping or saying something. I'm here. I need this. Listen to me. Hear me out. Things like that.
Okay, no, and yes, so sometimes it can be literally,
Yeah.
but typically metaphorically, and where
Yeah.
the idea of burning down the village really causing some disruption in the place
Yes.
where they're supposed to get assistance. So thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else want to share any feedback on or thoughts on the quote? One of the things that I want to share that I found was interesting in our first session, and we'll use the same kind of analogy. One of the teams was talking about giving an adult comparison. And so while the quote said child, mm-hmm. Adults are just children that have gotten bigger and older. And so we sometimes do similar things within our villages or our places of community when we don't feel seen, heard, or connected in a way to get our needs met. And so as we go through our journey on talking about trauma responsive engagement, that is actually one of the keys in being trauma responsive, is actually starts with you and your self-reflection. And so while we talk about children, the behavior of children, and adults have tantrums too. In different situations, you may not fall on the floor and kick your feet, but as adults, we do similar things. A quick funny story, speaking of tantrums, I have 3 grandchildren, and I've shared before. One's 16 today, and then I have a 2-year-old and a 1-year-old. And I was in Vegas with them over the weekend, and it was really late. The 1-year-old, the 2-year-old, they were really, really tired. We're on the way home, but not fast enough. And so they're crying and bawling. I think they were in a competition to see who could cry louder. And daddy was in the back seat. I was in the front seat. Mom's driving. And daddy was like, talking to the 2-year-old, can you please stop letting those words come out of her mouth? She wanted to get out of the car seat because little one's out of the car seat. So they're both crying and having a fit. So we're in the drive-through. And I had ordered chicken nuggets. And I told my daughter, said, if he asks, because we have been waiting for a while, so if he asks, tell him I want honey mustard. She goes, no, I ordered you barbecue sauce. So I pretended to be one of the kids, and I threw my hands back and yelled, no, I don't want barbecue sauce. So I had a quick tantrum, and it scared both of them. But I thought it would diffuse the tension from the kids a little bit. So yes, adults, that wasn't a real tantrum, but it really tickled me, scared them. It kind of changed the air a little bit. But adults, sometimes we do have those real life tantrums because we wanted honey mustard versus barbecue sauce, or not feeling connected, and don't feel like our needs are met. Or sometimes we are just stressed and overwhelmed, and it shows up in different kinds of ways. So I don't advocate for the tantrum and wailing, but they laugh about it now. They weren't laughing in the moment. So let's get into a little bit more content. The other thing I wanted to kind of take back, and something that Liz shared, we don't have it on the screen, but we all serve the same community. So we are the village. And when we think about going in to provide assistance and responses, not to be discouraged. Sometimes when you have a child or person that is burning down the village, being difficult, or because of trauma, we're going to actually look at something today, seem to be resistant or maybe even causing harm. But when we when we understand trauma and its impact, we may see these things in an effort to get attention, but I invite you to not take it personal, not to take it personal, not that they're not trying to be receptive. But yes, remembering not to take it personal and that what attention really looks like. So let's get back into some more content. So thank you all. Oh, so I'd also like to ask you in the chat, and you can chat, everyone is fine, your name and agency. That also will be our backup, because I have found sometimes in Zoom, I've had glitches where I go to pull reports to mark attendance and keep numbers, and sometimes it's not there. So as a backup, and then that way also we know, some of you got a chance to meet small groups, but in the chat, just really quickly put in your name and agency so we know who's present. And I'm going to keep talking. So thank you all for the discussion. So let's talk about what is trauma. And this is where I'd like a volunteer to unmute and read our definition of trauma. Who'd like to read our working definition of trauma? Ursula, I see your hand. I just happen to be moving around.
I'd be happy to. Trauma is threat that we are unable to process or not prepared to handle, resulting in an altered sense of well-being.
Okay, so trauma, yes, is a threat. Sorry to miss that. So yes, so thank you, Ursula. Because a lot of times people, oh, I know what trauma is, but I can't really put it into words. So here's some words, and we will have some more in subsequent sessions. But when you experience a threat to your sense of safety and well-being, yes, things happen, but the trauma itself is when you get to the point that you're not able to process it or you're not prepared to handle it. And it alters your sense of well-being. And by well-being, whether you're shaken, you no longer want to be in this particular space, you're not able to articulate, not able to talk, you're not feeling safe, you're not feeling comforted. And so when a situation happens, car accident, we'll try and keep it very neutral. A car accident, while they do happen, in that moment, you're like, wait, what happened? How did this come here? Or maybe you bumped someone or someone bumped you. And in the moment, you're like, okay, what happened here? So you're not able to process it. And depends on your state and other things that are going on. Maybe you've been an offender bender before, but this time it takes its toll on you. And it might take a little bit of time for you to recover. So trauma is a event. It could be a single event, a sequence of events, but something that alters your sense of well-being, even for a short time. So we're going to hold on to that definition. So, let me change our share. So here is a wonderful explanation. Thank you all for the chats. And so we'll be able to save that. One of my new favorite videos now that really describes trauma. So I invite you to take some notes on what you learned about trauma from this video. And then we do have a few discussion questions that we'll do all together. All right. So trauma and the Incredible Hulk.
Hey, welcome back everyone. Today I want to talk about the Incredible Hulk and why I use the Incredible Hulk metaphor for nearly all my patients with trauma. Because it's one of the best metaphors for understanding how trauma impacts the brain, how we think, how we feel, and how we react to different situations. And it also has some clues about how to actually help people recover from trauma. So everyone knows that the Incredible Hulk is one of America's favorite superheroes. But did you know that he actually has a severe history of childhood abuse at the hands of his father? And so Bruce Banner always had this huge capacity for rage as a way to protect himself from perceived threat. But then when he got infected with gamma radiations, it turned his rage into one of the most powerful forces in the universe. And we all know that as he starts to get angry, his eyes turn green, his skin turns green, and he starts to grow muscles at an incredible rate. As his Hulk starts to come up, his capacity for intelligence goes way down. And as the Hulk is raging, there's this underlying sense of self-hatred because Banner hates turning into the Hulk. The rest of the world tries to stop the Hulk by sending the world's military against him, but every time you shoot the Hulk or threaten him, it just makes him absorb more gamma radiation, become stronger and stronger, and probably less and less smart. And the only thing that can help the Hulk calm down is actually to just be done with his rage, destroy the threat, and then go jump to South America or some other beautiful place and take a nap for a day and a half and then wake up and realize that you've tattered your clothes and you probably left a wake of destruction. And you have to find your way back to civilization. Now, there's a really important lesson about managing kids who Hulk out too. The thing that the world usually does whenever they see a child acting out and hulking out is that they threaten consequences to them. And this is exactly like shooting the Hulk with military weapons. I mean, the more you shoot at the Hulk, you just make him stronger and stronger and madder and madder. And this is what happens to all these kids who are raging out. Everyone sends them to timeouts or threatens consequences and takes away privileges, and it just makes them escalate more and more. And then we end up classifying them as the problem, as having rage and anger issues, when in fact, they just have this overreactive alarm system that operates just like the way that the Hulk does. And so you're going to ask, okay, then what do we do with the Hulk? Now, the first thing you have to do is actually to never let the Hulk come out in the first place. And the way you do that is by strengthening Banner's capacity for self-awareness, to know what triggers him and to recognize when he's starting to get mad. Because when his eyes are green, maybe there's a little bit of capacity for controlling that reaction to become full-blown Hulk. And you also try to help give Banner other skills for dealing with anger and aggression. But at the same time, Banner sometimes needs the Hulk because there are real threats out there. So you can't really hate the Hulk when he comes out. You just have to know when to use him. And then when the Hulk is out, there's really not much you can do. And even for traumatized people, as soon as the sympathetic nervous system is activated and the whole stress response is activated, it's going to take a good 45 minutes to an hour for the body to metabolize all of that adrenaline that's coursing through the body. And this is why I like chill out spaces for schools, just a place where kids can go and feel safe and try to calm themselves back down. Now, the other thing you can do when Banner's eyes are green and he still has some capacity to think is to make him focus on what really matters most in this moment. And particularly if you make him focus on who matters most to you, who do you love, what do you care about most in this world, then sometimes it can help de-escalate him down from turning into the Hulk completely. So I hope that helps. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Goodbye, David. And I hope you find your safe place. Your refuge.
Thank you.
I remember rewatching this and the music kind of gave me flashbacks. I remember the original Hulk as a kid watching this, and that music took me back to childhood. So let's talk about trauma and the Hulk. So a couple of discussion questions. So I invite you all to either raise hand or kind of chime in. So how does this apply to our work in crisis situations? Understanding trauma and the Hulk. How can this, what we learned in the video, how can this apply to the work that we're going to be doing or are currently doing? Excuse me.
One of the things that struck me is when we're in trauma situations, especially with children, but with adults as well, do they feel like there's a safe space? I mean, you know, if you're in certain kinds of traumas, you've taken them out from a fire or they've just been abused or whatever, how do you find and identify a safe space for them?
Great question. And that is very important. And sometimes, and there's a couple other videos we're going to go through, and sometimes that safe space is more metaphorical, and it is about making that connection versus that of the physical space. And we're going to define trauma, and it's about emotional, psychological, and physical safety. So great question, Ursula. Yes. And sometimes that sense of safety is just having someone there present with you that's a familiar face or a comforting face. Magali, you're unmuted. Did you want to chime in?
No, I was just going to say acknowledging them, like hearing them and talking to them and letting them just kind of like speak their mind. So they know that you're listening to them and they're speaking their mind. So they're slowly calming down. And then, you know, you're just reiterating that you're hearing them and you're just talking to them in a tone where you're not saying like yelling at them or like, what's wrong with you? It's just like, okay, you know, let's calm down. Let's take some deep breaths. Let's see how we can, you know, work together.
Absolutely. And yes, and so you cued on one of the words is like a chalkboard scratch to me when people are like, what's wrong with you? You know, Oprah talks about that. Don't ask people what's wrong, right? Because that, you know, you've experienced trauma. And that's why we do these conversations to understand what trauma is, how it shows up. So you're not having to ask those questions, but you can go in knowing that one of the things that is needed is that sense of safety. Thank you. Bria.
Good morning. I think it's also beneficial for us to know when our eyes are turning green and when we're starting to hook out. And so when we need to get ourselves back in balance.
Right. We're going to talk about that. And then thank you for bringing that. So that's a good full circle, because part of that is recognizing before your eyes turn green, what are some of those triggers for you, and having an arsenal of things to help to de-hulk you before you get there, especially in the work that we're doing. So now that we are trauma informed and knowing how this exists, part of it's important for us as the responders to have some arsenals for ourselves to help de-escalate ourselves, and to know if we're hulking out, maybe that's not the time for us to go find another hulk. And we joked about this. You don't usually have, two hulks together, not a good combination. We were talking about the only situation where there was two hulks is the She-Hulk. That's a whole nother movie series. But most of the time in movies, you don't see two hulks. You might see Hulk against some other kind of character, but two hulks together, who's going to calm who's down? Yeah, it's just going to continue to co-escalate. But great points. Any other thoughts on how this applies? I do have a couple other questions though. Great conversation. Thank you on that. So he mentioned a few things that are strategies, and that's the day and a half. So Hulk goes away to South America. That's his safe place. It's physically safe, emotionally, psychologically safe. He has that. But sometimes our folks don't have that specific physical space or time frame. But it takes, in reality, about 45 to 60 minutes to recover from an immediate crisis kind of situation, just to even kind of Hulk down. So how can we incorporate the knowledge from the video about the 45 to 60 minutes recovery time, and using the question about what matters most to them? How can we use the knowledge that we just learned? How can we use that in the role that we'll be playing as responders, or any role that we're playing for those in crisis situations? How can this be applied?
Well, I think one of the things you pointed out earlier, which was sometimes it's not a space, it's a person, that we can't think we can just sort of dash in, dash out. We've handed them a blanket and we've handed them a cup of water. They're going to be fine. We're going to move on to the next one. So how to deploy sufficient resources that people have that connection that they need for that period of time, and someone they can turn to. And that gets into a resource issue. And, I start playing out different scenarios, and they're all so vastly different about who might be there and who might be able to stay and that kind of thing, that you can't just, answer it in one short sentence.
But no, really great idea. You're talking about resource deploying, right? And so again, I want to be first on the scene, and but first on the scene, there's still a lot of chaos. Hulk is still green. He's still in his Hulk form. But where after that 60 minutes, where maybe you need to bring David Banner or Bruce Banner a change of clothes after he's hulked out, because his clothes now no longer fit 60 minutes later. Or the fact that when we first show up in that moment, that Hulk is still very visible. So we're not going to be able to be as effective in providing that safe space, because at that point, Hulk is not, when we're in that space of trauma and haven't kind of started to calm down. And you talked about, Hulk's not very smart in that moment. That part of that survival brain is active, and survival and learning take place in the same part of the brain, but they can't operate at the same time. So when survival brain is active, learning brain is silenced. And so a lot of times we're going in trying to provide comfort and reassurance in that first 60 minutes, and then our feelings get hurt because they're still trying to burn down the village. And so keeping those things in mind, that what is needed is really time after. What about Magali? You had unmuted. Did you want to chime in?
Oh, well, I was going to say something similar to what Ursula had mentioned, but like, for example, here with our students here, it would just be just sitting there with them, and even if it's on the stairs or whatever, or just going, once they calm down, just going for a walk. Just walk to the grassy area, just a walk away from where the whole situation started. And that just tends, and then the conversation just changes, and then they can go ahead and say, what actually triggered, what actually happened to them, or even here in the library, where it's a quiet space and they can just put their head down, but half the time they really just need to let everything out. And once it's all out, then they can calmly discuss what the situation was, what the trigger was, how could we have gone about that in a better way?
Right, so providing that proverbial or metaphorical South America, and it could just be walking outside, getting out of the environment, but giving that time and staying away from my two least favorite words, calm down. You just need to calm down. That doesn't work for anyone, you all. I don't care.
Never works.
Never works, has not worked, will not work. So, this definition of insanity, you keep telling someone that and wonder why hope just won't go away. Ultra.
This comes back to training a second. I just want to, because we have this poignant picture of two children in the back of a police car who had just been removed from their families. And we have the picture because they had been delivered bears and coloring books and stuff from us. But there was nobody with those children. And this goes back to training and deployment of resources. Those kids, we understood, sat in that car for several hours by themselves. That's, they've got no safe space.
And while
person or physically either.
Right. And so they're being made to feel like criminals versus that of someone who's been victimized and traumatized. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. Ultra, I see you're unmuted. Did you want to chime in before we go to the next slide?
Yes, I just wanted to say that probably putting yourself in the position of that person, being a child or an adult or something, may give you a better understanding or an example of what that person is going through. So what if that was me experiencing that trauma? What would I do? And then that may help me to be more assertive in terms of the assistance that I could provide.
Thank you. And that's exactly why we're doing these trainings, because what happens sometimes people try and do that in the moment. And that's not the time to figure it out in the moment. So that's why we're providing these trainings to kind of give you a heads up and give you some things to think about to start pulling together a toolbox for when these situations arise. All right, so great concept. We'll keep referring back to hulking out. That's going to be our term. So then this idea of being trauma informed. So need another reader, please. What does it mean to be trauma informed? Who'd like to read the definition of being trauma informed?
Lisa Barrios here.
Oh, Lisa, thank you. Hi, Lisa,
Take it
go
away,
ahead.
Lisa.
Oh, this is me also testing my mic. Glad y'all can hear me.
Okay,
We
go
can,
ahead,
we
we
can.
got you.
Good morning. Considering, okay, what does it mean to be trauma informed? Considering the potential for exposure to trauma and being sensitive at initial approach to create an environment that is emotionally, physically, and psychologically safe.
Thank you, Lisa. So the idea that we now know, kind of, we all have the potential for hulking out. So when we show up on the scene, we don't have to get into, okay, well, tell me exactly what happened. No, you're there. You've been deployed because there has been a crisis, traumatic situation. So then how do we show up at initial approach for whoever we're engaging with the background and knowledge that someone has experienced trauma? And our goal is to provide a safe space, metaphorically, emotionally, physically, and psychologically. And so here's some, who was that? Things not to do. So not showing up, talking about what's wrong with them. They've just experienced something traumatic. You ask Hulk what's wrong with him. Are you going to get much information? Yeah, no. So part of it, instead of asking what's wrong, figuring out what happened to that child and not asking them what happened. So getting as much information, but also knowing one of the things that we are also working to do, we have agencies and resource and tangible things, but at some point we would like to have an army of folks that do go through some additional training that we can deploy as requested. And I'll use the word deploy as requested when there's situations, so we can go in providing the metaphorical South America, and provide that safe space as needed. Maybe even so in a situation where teachers have been there to help students, but who's there to help and comfort and provide that safe space for teachers? We can do that. And so that's something that we'll talk further with you about. So there's additional training. So you're armed with information to be able to provide that. So part of, instead of asking what happened, knowing now the background, what trauma does, you go in knowing that trauma can do so many different kinds of things. So our goal is to provide that safe space at the very beginning. And so here's the assumptions around through SAMHSA's trauma-informed assumptions. And so what is it? Trauma-informed care is about recognizing, realizing the prevalence and impact of trauma, and recognizing the signs of trauma. So, when someone's hulking out, and then are we integrating evidence-based practices when we approach, and then doing our best to resist re-traumatization, because sometimes our very goal to be helpful can actually be re-traumatizing. So we're actually I need an additional reader here. So here's a scenario. There's actually two slides. And so here's an example of the prevalence and impact of trauma. So who'd like to read this? Who'd like to volunteer to read? Again, it's a scenario, so it's 2 slides.
I'll do it.
Okay, so, all right, so here, while Ultra is reading, the rest of you are going to keep count of how many different people are a part of this scenario. So you're going to get a head count of how many different peoples and bodies or persons are mentioned in the scenario. All right, Ultra, take it away.
Terry, who is 11, and Regina, who is 5, are siblings living in a home wrought with domestic violence. It is not uncommon that dad comes home drunk and belligerent. Terry has several wounds from trying on a few occasions to defend mom. Now, Terry will huddle with Regina under their shared bed. Nancy, the neighbor, on the right of the 4-unit apartment complex, has 3 children of her own. She has called the police in the past and has even taken the 2 children to her home. Unfortunately, the violence on this Saturday night seems more horrific than before, so Nancy calls the police, indicating she suspected hearing gunfire. The 2 police officers arrive first. Once Nancy sees the paramedics, she creeps in with them to grab the children. The father is arrested. The mom is taken to the hospital. The father is booked by the clerk, fingerprinted, photographed, strip searched, then escorted to a cell with 3 other detainees. Meanwhile, mom is received in emergency by the charge nurse. The attending physician examines her, and the intake clerk collects her information. Eventually, the hospital social worker is summoned. I think that, I got it back. I'm sorry. Since Nancy's children go to the same school as Terry and Regina, Nancy took all 5 children to school on Monday. When Terry's teacher asked why there was no homework in the bin, Terry snaps, "I didn't do it." The other 20 students started whispering, murmuring, and gesturing. This is not Terry's usual behavior.
All right, thank you, Ultra. All right, so how many did you all count? Put in the chat for me. How many persons did you count? Persons, positions. So put in the chat for me to see what we came up with. And Ultra, you're off the hook for this assignment since you read.
I was trying to count now.
All right, starting to populate. Let's see what we have. So we want a total count. Because you got 2 slides. All right, I see 11 on the first slide. I see 30.
35 plus paramedics.
Okay, you all can send, okay, thank you, Oscar. You can send to everyone also so we can see. 35 plus paramedics, so that's how many, y'all?
41,
So
lost count at
usually there's
20-ish.
two.
Yeah, there's a
Right,
plethora of people.
okay, all right, 35, okay.
Lost count. Yeah.
Okay, so actually, based on all of the content and characters, there's 44 that have been identified. It could be more if you assume that there's one clerk doing fingerprinting, another doing strip search, those kinds of things, but at least 44. However, let's add, in the participant count, there's 17 of us here today. So that 44 plus 17 gives us 61 people impacted by one incident, because you all just read it and heard it, and we're discussing it. So trauma isn't isolated to just if it's a one-on-one crime. It's not just an isolated incident. It has a widespread impact. And we all are serving the same community. And even though it may not be our neighborhood or right next door, we're still impacted by it. So trauma has a huge impact. And so back to the sense of safety, people long to be heard, and that sense of belonging, they long to be seen, heard, and valued. And that is one of the most important things that we can do as responders, and feeling a sense of safety and being soothed. And here's an example, and Ursula, you kind of spoke to this. Here's an example of a trauma response, an example of being trauma responsive. Some of you were present with us at our last in-person meeting versus as a training, and we had law enforcement share some of the things that they do in this particular unit, but a lot of officers actually have teddy bears in their car. And so while the teddy bear doesn't heal things, but it can be soothing, it can provide that space, help a child to feel seen, even an adult, to feel seen and acknowledged when someone actually hands them a teddy bear and acknowledge that, wow, this must be really scary. I see you, you're not invisible, you're not by yourself. That's just one example. But let's kind of switch to informed versus response. So informed, we have the knowledge on a particular subject, so we know what trauma is. But being responsive, it's conscious effort to take a step back and make sure that we breathe, we review the situation, so we become aware and present, and attempt to figure out the probable cause and consider the available solutions. But in order to do that, we also have to be at a space of being present. So here is our trauma responsive strategy. So we're going to watch this video and you're going to take some notes. So take some notes, and I want you to write down, it's going to ask about what is your purpose. So that's one of the things that you're going to be doing.
Hey, welcome back everyone. Today I thought we would talk about the big question, what it really takes to become a trauma-informed organization. And I think my answer is actually quite different from what other people say, because I think other people focus on what actions should be taken, what needs assessments need to be done, or what services need to be put in place. And for me, I think that the most important thing is the moment when a person is about to become trauma reactive, and how well everyone else can handle that situation without becoming trauma reactive themselves. Because what I've learned from doing interviews of offenders or students or anyone who uses these trauma-informed organizations is that the most important thing that makes or breaks a person's day is actually the moment-to-moment interactions with people. And people as random as like the lunch lady in the cafeteria who will give you a full serving of food or not just based on whether or not they like you and how they feel that day. Or whether or not a safety officer will use excessive discipline just because they're frustrated with you. Those little moment-to-moment things are really what make people feel safe in an environment. And what I don't get is that the hospitality industry completely understands this. Every five-star hotel or five-star restaurant knows that service is the foundation upon which the whole experience rests. And so I really think that trauma-informed organizations need to take a hospitality mindset. And what hospitality means in a trauma-informed organization, I think, is that you're always being sensitive and attentive to the other person's needs and sensitive to their trauma reactiveness, and the fact that you yourself can be trauma reactive, and that you have to always guard against going into survival brain yourself, and to amp up as much as you can your ability to stay clear, to stay purpose-driven and goal-directed and emotionally attuned to the other people. Okay, so then the first step in learning how to do that is actually to understand what your own survival brain looks like. Now for me, I know that when I get into survival brain, if I'm going into the aggressive mode, then I think people are stupid, that they have bad intentions, that they don't mean well, that they're only doing things to hurt other people. And then whenever I go into the withdrawal phase, I just want to give up on a project, give up on the people, think that they're never going to change. So when I realize that I'm in that alarm state, the first thing I do is just to slow things down as much as possible. Because I know that my body's been activated and I have adrenaline rushing through me and I'm feeling intense feelings, and there's no way that I can just snap out of it. I have to let my emotions and my body cool down on its own. So I have to have a lot of patience for myself. I also try to scan my body and get grounded in it again. And I try to take some deep belly breaths and take control of my breathing again. And the other really important thing to do is that I try not to get mad at myself for getting into that alarm state. Because I know that my alarm has only been activated because something really important to me is going on, or because I feel like something that I really care about is being threatened. And then once I do that, I try to figure out what page I'm on. And PAGE is an acronym that I just made up that I think captures the essence of how to de-escalate from an alarm state. And the first step of PAGE is to really remember what my purpose is. And by purpose, I mean my purpose in life, and the kind of life I want to live, and the values that I uphold. And then I try to remember how this moment can be a moment when I'm trying to live my purpose in life. And then the next thing I do is try to figure out whether I'm being emotionally attuned to the other person. Because as alarms go up, then self-absorption kicks up, and I'm only worried about how this person's trying to attack me and whether I'm getting my needs and opinions across. And so this really helps me to slow down and pay attention to what's going on in the other person. And the next thing I do is to ask, what is the goal or intention of our meeting, this interaction, or even this very moment or this conversational turn? And when you're in an alarm state, you forget what the goal is and all you care about is self-protection. But if you remember what your goal is, then that can help you to stay focused on what you really want to accomplish and what you want to say and do. And then finally, I ask myself, what am I really feeling? And oftentimes, the only things I can understand are the anger and frustration. So I have to dig a little deeper and ask, what is the hurt or the vulnerability that I'm feeling that I really don't want to express to the other person because I'm feeling threatened? And then I try to reorient my stance to express that hurt and vulnerability and feel confident that that's the only way that I'm ever going to get anything accomplished. And what I really want to say is that being in this clear, calm, purpose-driven state of mind is incredibly difficult, and it takes hundreds and hundreds of hours of practice. I think of it like being in great cardiovascular shape if you're an athlete, because you can learn a lot of techniques for being trauma-informed, and that's like learning the actual skills of your game. But to actually be able to execute all those techniques, you have to be in great physical shape. And to do that, you have to run miles and miles every day, and you have to keep training, and you can never let that cardiovascular endurance slide, or else your game just suffers. So this is really the most foundational, most important thing that people need to learn to become a trauma-informed person, and then to help your organization become trauma-informed as well. Now, after you've done this for 100 hours of practice, then you can move on to some of the techniques that we'll go over in the next videos.
All right, so as we're winding up, I want you to think about what is your purpose? And when we're in the midst of responding,
Thank you.
Knowing what your survival brain looks like, and this is an assignment I'd like for you to do for yourself. Think about, what does your survival brain look like? Because we were talking about being trauma reactive. We don't want to be reactive when we go in to be helpful to someone else. So what is your survival brain? What are your triggers? And then remembering, what is your purpose? Your overall purpose? Because we go in, I want to save the day, but is that really what we're doing? So then when we encounter something like an aggressive officer that's, you come there to help and they're like, no, who are you? Get away, back up. Then we make it about ourselves. But remembering what your purpose is, and then thinking about how you can remind yourself in the moment what your purpose is. So that is one of your go-to tools when you start to Hulk out, when you've come to be helpful to someone else and something triggers you and you can't do the task that you came to do, and it might cause you to Hulk out. So what can you do? Where's your safe space? What can you do to remind yourself of your overall purpose so you stay grounded in that when you are reacting, when you're involved in trauma responsive situations. And at the core of that is making sure that you are taking care of yourself, for sure, okay? So yeah, creating a culture of self-care and being mindful and making sure that you're well and in a safe space so that you can be present, recognize your survival brain, and remembering your purpose when you're showing up to provide that safe space for someone else. Oscar, do you have the eval link?
Eval link. No, I don't think I do.
Okay, we'll email that to you. So any questions? I'll stay around for a few minutes. If anyone has any questions on anything that we covered, this is the drop in the bucket. And I'm glad that you all are here and on that road to taking in more information so that you are more trauma informed and trauma responsive. Our next session will be on collective trauma, what that looks like, and we'll be talking about some more strategies on that. And interweaving throughout our networking opportunities and then connecting it to law enforcement like we did. We talked about their trauma responsiveness and even the little bit of scenario. So I'll stay around if anyone has any questions, and then we will send you over the link for evaluation for today's workshop.
Wonderful.
And
thank you all for being here.
I'll see you for the next go round. Yes, Ursula, I see you.
I'm struggling a little bit with.
We're going to stop the recording.
You got it.